Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this evening's webinar. My name is Orla Gallagher. I'm the Director of Development at UCD Foundation, and you're all very welcome to the special UCD briefing on cybersecurity and COVID-19. I think we can all agree that one of the immediate consequences of COVID-19, and one that has affected most of us, has been the rapid global shift towards working from home. And this move to digital remote working has brought with it countless of questions and challenges, particularly in the area of cybersecurity, as we've all become more reliant than ever on internet-enabled applications and products to help us conduct business and communicate on a daily basis. So I think we're all here this evening because we know it's a vital aspect now that we adopt good cyber hygiene practices to help us navigate this new world. So now I'd like to introduce our panel for this evening, who will be sharing their extensive knowledge, insights and advice regarding cyber threats in the heat of this current COVID-19 crisis and in the post-COVID world, which hopefully isn't too far away. I'm delighted to welcome our very special guests. We have Jackie Fox, Managing Director of Accenture Ireland Security. We have Marguerite Berry, Assistant Professor in the UCD School of Information and Communication Studies. Cindy Murphy, President of Tetra Defence, and Brian Halligan, Inspector at the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau. So at this stage, I would like to hand over to our moderator for this evening's webinar, Elizabeth Nolan, who is Head of Consultancy Services at Consult UCD.
Thank you, Orla, and thank you to Orla and Darren for inviting me along this evening. I run Consult UCD, which is UCD's managed consultancy service, which helps organisations and academics come together to share the academics' expertise via a consultancy arrangement. So we're a new channel of engagement for UCD. And just this January, we had started a campaign to highlight UCD's expertise in the area of cyber. We started that with an event in January where we showcased some of our academics' expertise along with some industry panelists. That webinar series, or that series, is now becoming a webinar series, but in the meantime, I'm delighted to be here today to moderate this session. Like many of you, business has been impacted by COVID-19, but I'm really excited to hear from our panelists this evening about how we can protect ourselves online, how we can continue to operate successfully online, and how we can enjoy our online experience. So I'm going to start by inviting Jackie Fox just to give us a quick introduction to herself.
Thank you very much. My name is Jackie Fox, and I'm the Managing Director in Accenture for Security in Ireland. I also have another couple of roles. I'm an adjunct lecturer in UCD on the Masters in Security and Forensics, and I specialise in information security on that. I'm Vice Chair of the Board of Cyber Ireland, which is a board that was set up by the government to help industry, academia and government actually collaborate to enhance the cybersecurity industry in Ireland, trying to bring in FDI, increase awareness and education and things like that. And I'm also a contributor on cybersecurity for the World Economic Forum. Day to day, I'm an technologist. I specialize in cybersecurity incident response. I advise boards and I take a risk-based view with organizations, trying to help them apply whatever limited budget they have in the best way to help them to be a more secure organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Cindy, good morning to you. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon from the US, at least this part of, I guess all of the US is in the afternoon now. I'm Cindy Murphy. I'm the president and founder of Tetra Defence. It's a incident response, forensics, and proactive cyber services business out of the Midwest of the United States. We're based in Madison, Wisconsin. I was a law enforcement officer for 31 years prior to retiring to start this business, and had grown up in a policing world where proactive policing or community policing was the strategy. And so I've carried that into Tetra Defence, and we do our very best to help our clients work on prevention strategies and also to help them help themselves when they face problems, whether it's a ransomware incident or some other network intrusion type event. So we don't come in with capes on and save the day. We come in and partner with our clients to help them understand what's happened and find a reasonable way out of that situation that leaves them in a much more secure posture. So that's me. I also went to UCD from 2009 to 2011. Brian Halligan was my classmate in the Forensic Computing and Cybercrime Master's Program. One of my very favorite lifetime experiences was traveling back and forth to complete that program. I've been back and forth to Ireland a total of 13 times, and I'm overdue for another trip. Make it lucky 14.
Great. Thanks, Cindy. Brian, will you give us a few words on yourself?
Yes, good evening, everybody. First of all, I hope you are keeping safe in these unusual times. It certainly is strange for us all. I think none of us have seen times like this before. So, and I guess this is why we're all here. Things are changing and people are adapting, etc. Brian Halligan is my name. I'm an inspector in the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau. I've recently joined the Bureau since the end of 2019, although I have many years experience in law enforcement before that, working mainly in our telecommunications section. The Garda National Cybercrime Bureau was first established as the Garda Computer Crime Investigation Unit in 1991, and it has been established as a full bureau since 2017. So that was after a report from the Future Policing and Commission on the Future Policing in Ireland report. So from that point on, we've been expanding our bureau and taking in extra responsibilities, etc. Our primary function would be computer forensics examinations. A lot of the digital devices that are seized during criminal investigations will come into our department here for digital forensics analysis and investigations. We are primarily responsible as well for cybercrime investigation. So any type of cyber-dependent crime, as we call it, crime which is completely dependent on the computer systems or IT systems, that crime is investigated from this unit here. We have an investigative unit who are active in that regard. We have a role in cyber intelligence, cybercrime prevention, cybercrime training, both within our agency and to the wider Garda organisation as well. Public awareness, events like this, coming to the public, letting them know we're here, what our role is within the sphere of cybersecurity. Like, most people are very familiar with the term cybersecurity, but the term cybercrime then is within that, because behind all those security breaches, there's nearly always somebody perpetrating a crime behind it. A lot of our function is to channel down and see, can we identify the criminal activity within that sphere. So I guess that's just it's a branch of cybersecurity which we do specialize in. And not surprisingly, within that, then we would have a lot of national and international liaison. So obviously, cybercrime is a borderless crime. It's cross-jurisdictional. That brings its own challenges in terms of how we investigate that crime, and we have to deal a lot with other law enforcement agencies right around the world. So we would liaise very closely with our Europol colleagues there, who would have large connections in other law enforcement agency, and also Interpol as well. So we have quite a substantial network an international law enforcement liaison. And then industry and academic liaison. Type of cybercrime in general differs than other crime in the sense that you need a lot of technical expertise and a lot of development. We understand that cannot be done alone from within law enforcement, so it's absolutely essential that we liaise. We work closely with our partners in UCD. We do a lot of work with UCD with our training, using the academic side of it from that. And then in the wider cybersecurity industry in general, we work quite closely with colleagues in that field as well, and how we can best serve the community in our defences against cybercrime in general.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian. Looking forward to hearing more from you on that. And finally, Marguerite, will you introduce yourself, please?
I will. Thanks very much, Elizabeth. And hi, everybody. I'm very happy to be part of this webinar this evening. My name is Marguerite Berry, and I'm Assistant Professor in the School of Information and Communication Studies at UCD. which is part of the College of Social Sciences and Law. So what we do there is everything that connects people and information and technology. My own area is in the area of human-computer interaction and ethical design for technologies. I'm also a collaborator at the ADAPT Centre, which is an SFI-funded centre for digital research. I'm also the program director of our new MSc program in communication and media. So I have both the teaching and research side, and I suppose along with a lot of my colleagues in the School of Information and Communication Studies, we would be involved both at the theory and design and practice and sort of usability and user testing end of all kinds of technologies, from conversational user interfaces to apps to web applications, websites, basically anything, as I said, where the digital and the human meet. So my interests are very much about the humans. Everybody else here, I think, is going to be very well qualified to talk about what might be happening inside the machines and the networks. I'm more interested in some of the design crimes that are being done in relation to cybersecurity, and also what can be done maybe from a design point of view, but also what we can understand about how people use technology so that we can make them safer in how they use them as well.
Great, Marguerite, thank you for that. I think you're right, there's a human aspect to everything we're going to talk about tonight. So we'll get stuck in on the slightly more technical side to start with, but I think our audience will be glad to hear there's nobody too technical on our panel tonight. We're really going to talk about how businesses are feeling the impact of COVID-19 and how us as users and people working from home, how we're feeling. So Jackie, I might ask you to start and tell us a little bit, please, about the types of concerns your clients are coming to you in Accenture with at the moment. And in particular, are they concerned about having 80% to 100% of their workforce now working from home? What's really on their minds at the moment?
Right, thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, I think they are concerned about this. And I think initially when this happened, a lot of the concern was, oh, how can we get them to work from home? How can we enable it and make the technology work? But it's quite quickly changed into, is this a risk for us having people working from home? And so we've certainly been asked to help them look at maybe, you know, some very senior members in different organizations or different clients that we have, to make sure that they've got some level of security, or that they understand, you know, what the risks might be on their home network. And I suppose people are concerned about things like, in that situation, working from home, about, you know, whether somebody could eavesdrop on what they're doing, or whether they could, you know, they're more likely to have kind of money or data stolen from them because they're working from home. And the types of things that, you know, we might find that, you know, cyber criminals might look for would be things like picking up your banking credentials, or your passwords, or private documents, photos, emails, that sort of thing. And we do get asked the question a lot, like, is it riskier to work from a home network than it would have been to be working in an office environment? And the likelihood is, the answer to that is probably yes. If you're working in an office, if you take kind of computers out of it altogether, you know, you're going to have infrastructure in there around, you know, alarms, you'll have fire doors if a fire goes off, you'll have lots of protections that are built into it because it's an office that you wouldn't have at home. And it's quite similar on a home network. You know, you're not going to have some of the protections built in there that you might have in an office. And even if you bring your corporate laptop home and you're working from that in a home environment, you're going to have some protections on that, but it's still a bit like, you know, how would I put it? It's a bit like if you brought your Porsche and left it unlocked on O'Connell Bridge, that you might be kind of thinking, that might be a bit of a risk, you know. And then if you translate that into what would it be like if it was my home laptop working on my home network? Well, that's kind of maybe a bit like leaving like an unserviced kind of old classic car with dodgy brakes sitting out on O'Connell Bridge unlocked and waiting to see what might happen to it. So there definitely are greater risks the further you get away from kind of corporate land. You know, some of the things, I might give you a couple of examples of some of the sorts of things that you might be exposed to. And Brian, you can close your ears to this. Years ago, we used to do this thing called war driving, where we'd kind of go around and we'd look to see, do people have open Wi-Fi networks that you could just log onto and see what you could sniff when you were there. Now, obviously, people don't do that anymore. I've never done it, Brian, I promise. But that's something that, you know, if you were of a criminal intent, yes, you could absolutely still go around and do that, and basically sniffing out and trying to listen to what's going on people's networks. So if you don't have a password on your home network, the likelihood is it's open and that people could go and do this sort of thing. Another thing that we see people doing is sharing their devices, you know, and you'd say, well, yeah, you know, kind of, it's my laptop. I've no problem with my kids, wife, family, neighbors, whatever, using my laptop to check their email or do simple tasks. But actually there is a risk in doing this. And it's not that somebody would intentionally be doing something to you, but they might go and visit a bad website, for example, that was infected with something that might get you infected on your system. And they're not going to do that intentionally, but it still can be a risk to you. And if you expand that out a little bit further, I had an example of this happen to me myself, is that the people you're sharing your network with can create a risk for you. My son, when he was 11, was totally obsessed with this game called Minecraft. And you used to be able to design little bits and add them in yourself. And he designed this bit of the game, like this little mod, they called it, and it was kind of a hammer or something. And he wanted to share it with his friends. And so he looked up on YouTube, how do I do this? And basically it meant putting up an open server on our network. And luckily, because of what I do, I was monitoring. And I thought, what's going on our network? There's all this traffic kind of flying into our network here at home. And I realized my son had completely opened up our network and stuck a server up on it for the world and its mother to come and invite into our house. So he didn't do that maliciously, and luckily we were monitoring to see what was happening on our network. But if we weren't, then we might never have known that he was sharing stuff out and allowing people into our network externally. So some of the things that people maybe don't do that I'd be saying that you should do, you know, particularly when you're at home, is, you know, there's annoying security updates that tell you you can't use your system for 10 minutes. You should say yes to those. Some of the things, you know, if you've got a personal device that's not a corporate device, you should be making sure that you are actually up to date with things on it, and that those annoying updates do actually remind you to go ahead, that you haven't got them blocked. You should also be thinking of other risks. Maybe if you allow guests into your house, if you allow them onto your Wi-Fi network, maybe you should set up a separate network for them so that they're not potentially exposing you to the type of risks that we've already spoken about. And like in this world at the moment, we've got a vast array of these fabulous home connected devices that you can put on your network that allow you to control your lights kind of on and off and dim them, or that's got baby monitors or fancy doorbells that you can pick up on your phone. And all these things are wonderful kind of from a you know, a usage perspective and the functionality that they bring. But sometimes they weren't really designed with security in mind. And, you know, if a hacker happens to come along to your network, they could actually be exposing vulnerabilities. So I wouldn't say to people, don't use that sort of thing, but I would say maybe keep it on a separate area of your network. So you've got the equivalent of a fire door or a firewall between what you're doing that you're trying to keep private and secret versus what goes on the other side of the network. So you're keeping just kind of some segregation between the two areas. And I suppose another thing I would say, you know, if you have the facility to reach out to somebody and say, you know, what should I do? You should be identifying what you believe to be your assets. You should be trying to identify some kind of way that you can monitor whether access to those is appropriate, whether it's what you expect, and some kind of, you know, equivalent of a house alarm that's going to go off if something a bit odd happens on your system. So in a nutshell, that's the sort of conversations that we're having with people at the moment.
That's super, Jackie. Thank you. And some very practical advice thrown in there as well. Cindy, I can see you nodding in my panelist view. Are some of the challenges being faced by Irish clients similar to what your clients are bringing to you? And what kind of industries are clients coming to you from? Are there any particular industries that seem to be under threat?
Sure. So all of the points that Jackie made are really valid. And I think we're facing the same things all over the world, whether you're in the US or Ireland or Africa or wherever you are. For those of us who have scrambled to change our workplace from an office setting to a home setting, remoting into the office to work, we've done so with speed and convenience in mind and not with security in mind. And so we're seeing the consequences of what happens when that's what we have to do. So our clients come to us from all industries. So from anything from a small to medium-sized business to universities and government agencies with hundreds or thousands of endpoints on their networks. And we've had many of them who, in the name of speed and convenience, have made that security determination: am I, as a business, as an entity, am I at risk? And decided what threat actor would look at us as a target. We just do podiatry, or we just do taxes, or we're just this small little business. Who would be looking at us? Or we're a huge university. We got this, really. We've done this before. And so they make assumptions that they're not a target, and find out quickly that threat actors aren't targeting you based on what you do or who you are. They're targeting you based on how easy it is to find you. So if I'm a small company with 50 employees and I've solved the COVID-19 work from home problem by opening remote desktop services open to the internet, it's very easy for threat actors to find that. And those are the people that we're finding become quick victims of ransomware. And we're also seeing an uptick of business email compromise cases where a personal laptop is put onto a business network. Maybe the antivirus scan wasn't completed. Maybe it wasn't done with up-to-date definitions. And suddenly the vulnerabilities of that employee's laptop become part of the network's vulnerabilities, and they're not discovered in time to prevent issues. There's a lot of phishing-related emails that are being sent not only to people's business email addresses, but their home email addresses, related to COVID-19 and related to government relief, whether you're in the U.S. or some other company or country that's providing relief. And people are desperate at this point in time to find different forms of relief. And so they're more likely to click on those personal emails or those business emails, to follow those links, to open those attachments, and to open themselves up to malware that scans their system for those credentials and then results in email compromise that can lead to wire transfer fraud and those sorts of things. So yeah, our customers are really everybody from tiny little businesses to very large ones, and we see that those human beings behind the keyboard ultimately are the common weakness, depending, no matter what client we're talking about.
That's great, Cindy. Thank you. And Brian, maybe moving on to you, from what you've heard from what Jackie and Cindy are saying from this point of view, and we're hearing that cybercrime is all around us all the time, but particularly in the last couple of weeks with the COVID-19 pandemic. Are you, from the policing side, are you seeing an increase in cyber activity at the moment? Can you tell us about some of the existing threats and how that fits with recent trends?
Yes, and I think what Jackie and Cindy have raised some very valid points on that topic itself. What we're seeing from a law enforcement perspective, and bearing in mind, it's when we talk about what we're seeing, it's what crimes are being reported. There is a theory there that not a lot of cyber crimes are actually reported to law enforcement. So different entities or companies are worried about the reputational damage, etc. So they may not come straight to us. So as regards reported crime, what we're seeing, there's a lot of talk, okay, that cybercrime is on a major increase because of COVID-19. And if we talk about cyber-dependent crime, where people are actually using computers to hack into another computer system or an information system, we haven't seen any major uptake on that specific type of crime itself. But where we are seeing a lot of activity and where definitely there is an uptake is more on the cyber-enabled crime, which really is the traditional fraudulent behaviour. But what we're seeing now is that the criminals are kind of wrapping their fraudulent activity in a COVID-19 package to make it more attractive and really play on people's vulnerabilities, etc., and exploit the situation. Because there is no doubt that the COVID-19 crisis is a cybersecurity risk for everybody in general. And if I go a bit further with that, kind of what I mean by that is we see a lot of reports of, say, emails from certain charities who say they are working very hard on developing a vaccine for COVID-19. And if you can donate to this charity, it would be a great help. We're seeing, and you know, so like what they're focusing on at that point then is just that people are worried and scared about COVID-19 and they're trying to target that. We're also seeing then on a lot of emails, they know people are working from home a lot as well, and they're directing their emails in a kind of very clever way towards that. If people working from home and spending more time in the house, not just working from home. There has been a recent scam email going around within Ireland there as well, in relation to your Netflix account and saying your account is about to expire, log on and update your payment details. A fake email. So somebody, and you know what they're worried at there is that people are in the house, maybe they're working from home, or they're using Netflix in the evenings. It will be more so than ever to say, I want to use that straight away, and they don't even think about it. They click straight in and they do it. Or they're possibly, their kids are on Netflix at the moment, keeping them quiet while they're trying to work. So they will go straight in without maybe thinking about it or considering it fully, punch in their bank details into a fake website. Somebody has all your details. Other ones then we're seeing increase cases of sextortion, where there's emails circulating at the moment within Ireland there as well. Someone's getting an email saying that we know you visited an adult website, we have a recording, we're going to share this recording with all your friends or all your Facebook contacts, and look for extortion. Typical values, we've seen emails, there are values of 1,200 euros, 2,000 euros. And you know, even the value is kind of, it's enough to make it worth their while, but it's not enough to say to the person that possibly in a lot of cases that they can't afford it. It might just be on the threshold where a lot of people could actually decide maybe I'll pay 1,000 euros and this thing will go away. So there's a lot of thought goes into them. Interestingly, one of those ones recently would send you a password and usually it would have got your email and password probably from an old compromised website. There has been a number of big data leaks in the last number of years, and now that data is freely available online at the moment, even for sale on the dark web. There was one big hotel chain there recently was hacked. So what criminals would have at that point, they would have an email address and a password that you use at some stage. So what that is giving authenticity to their email. They don't actually have any footage of you or anything like it. But what they have is they have a password that you recognize, so it brings you into a false sense of security that they have. So they're quite clever as regards that as well. And it's not just emails as well. We're seeing quite a lot with messaging services, various WhatsApps or whatever messaging services. Links can be sent directly to somebody's phone through that. So likewise, somebody maybe doesn't give it enough consideration, click straight into the links, brings you to a compromised website, or you download a piece of malware, or you update your credentials incorrectly. Email or WhatsApp reporting me from one of the banking institutions saying your card is about to be frozen or your payment was deferred, please log on. And invariably you will find it wasn't from, the banks won't send such a message to you in such a form, but the criminals will, and they will quite readily know that most people don't actually believe or don't realize that the bank will never contact them in such ways. And by the time to do, somebody has invariably got access to your finances. So you know, what we would say to people is anything you're suspicious of, have to think twice about it. Have another look to see. Check out the web links. You don't have to go click on a link, even if you do think it's from a reputable source. You can just go straight in that and type in the website of the company you need to go to. Safer methods of doing your business, really. You know, and I suppose a key message which we would look at there is, if you don't suspect it, or if you don't expect it, suspect it.
Very good. Okay. Brian, thank you for that. And we'll come back maybe to you again towards the end for some more tips about staying safe online. But Marguerite, moving to you now from the human element. So how has COVID-19 impacted on how people use communication technologies? And if we're seeing alternative uses for some technologies, what has that revealed to us about digital security?
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks. It's great. I'm very glad I'm coming after everybody else, because I feel like they've really set the scene there in terms of like really quite serious threats. I think there's something very interesting happening, and we're all experiencing it. And actually, this is a great example. Here we are using Zoom, all of us. Zoom is an application that was actually developed, would you believe, the company was founded in 2011. But most of us probably hadn't heard of it probably before, maybe 6 months ago, 3 months ago. It's an application that was, they self-described themselves as a business software service company. It was really for sharing sales presentations at a distance, where you'd have people who are maybe in a boardroom in an office in one city sharing with the boardroom in an office in another city. Most of those meetings would have been set up by a single administrator. And you can probably tell that because of the interface for Zoom. For any of you who've tried to set up Zoom meetings, it's not the most user-friendly interface. And I think what I'm using that as an example, because I think what it's revealing, and now that we're using business software for say social connections with friends, for book clubs, for cocktail hour on a Friday evening, for birthday parties. I had one here, and sharing devices, as you were rightly saying there, and work devices with home devices, and for all sorts of different purposes, that we're suddenly realizing that it's raising a lot of questions about, I think, from the design point of view, about how well they're designed. And when we've heard about all the threats, as Brian has described there, and Cindy, I think we could be doing an awful lot better in terms of designing to empower people to be safer, to be able to look after their own security, to even, in Brian's case, to even make people feel like it's okay to report. But unfortunately, people do actually feel very vulnerable in these situations if something does go wrong. If you do click on that link, if you are phished, it's the most awful feeling for people. And they really, in lots of ways, would prefer not to report it. They'd probably prefer to get Cindy services to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So I think there's something very interesting. And I suppose what I'm hoping, I'm always hoping something positive will come out of all of this, is that we can do better with design. Now, it's very interesting when you look at Zoom, and I actually came across today, and I wouldn't mind just reading a quote. There was an interesting interview done with the CEO of Zoom back in kind of the end of March, beginning of April, when they were in shock as a company at how much they had actually grown and how many people were downloading the application and using it, and their servers were struggling all around the world. But also they came in seriously under fire in relation to privacy. Now, I don't know if anybody watching or listening, or any of the participants here, has had the joy of Zoom bombing happen to you. It's happened in education to a certain extent. That was the first kind of target, I think, by some of those bad actors or people just taking advantage, I guess, of the poor privacy that was there, again, for an application that was really not designed for these kinds of uses. So where, say, uninvited participants could come in and just start sharing their screen with all kinds of interesting imagery and video and things like that you might not have expected in a class situation. Thankfully, it hasn't happened to me yet. I'm hoping not. I actually noticed just before I joined this call that there was an update to Zoom again. I don't know if anybody else got that's ready to be installed, which has more privacy updates in it. So, and Jackie, you made the point about those kind of issues, even in terms of updates and security updates for design, that people kind of go, oh God, if I do that update now, my laptop is going to freeze and just, I'll have to restart it and it's not going to be available. I'll do it later. And we all do that. And these are all design issues, and they're all the kinds of issues that we talk about in human-computer interaction studies. And we, are constantly seeking funding for research into users, which is unfortunately much harder to get sometimes than it is to get funding to actually build the applications. But to just test how people are using them, and to test what's working and what's not working. And could we make it easier for people to set up their security more helpfully for themselves, so that they're not as vulnerable as they could be. So I think it's this issue of the fact that I think software developers and designers as well also maybe need to realize that you might think that you're designing an application for one very particular cohort of people and one particular use, but the history of technology shows us that all kinds of technologies have been adapted by users in very social kinds of ways, and that we end up kind of creating what their main uses are. Text messaging on phones is a classic example of that. That was never intended to be a core service initially, but it was users who actually saw the value of it. So I think there's a lot more room for good design. In cybersecurity generally, it's been an issue for a long time. We all know, you know, why do I have to click the box to say that I'm not a robot? You know, I think there's other ways that we could do this that can make it easier for people. So I suppose I'm a great believer in that good design can do an awful lot to improve experiences for everybody. It can do similar things in terms of physical security, a bit like what you were talking about, Jackie, in that, you know, we have you know, whether it's locks on doors and things like that, it's not necessarily that you have to have barbed wire everywhere to make somewhere seem secure, but just a sense of good design and good architecture does an awful lot for people's experiences in the workplace. And we can do similar things virtually in how we actually design software to just be more usable for people, whoever's using it, so that it can be used for birthday parties or for gaming or for watching drag queen shows, which was the latest use of Zoom that I heard of last week. So, you know, there's so much creativity out there, and there's so many different ways of using these things for good, that it would just be great if design could support that in ways that can prevent the bad actors from taking advantage of us.
Great, Marguerite, thank you. And I think with all this remote working, working from home going to be here for a long time, I think you're right. I think that we're going to see increasingly technologies being adapted for different uses than they were originally intended. Cindy, I might ask you to come in here now on the topic of social engineering. We mentioned it in the email inviting people to join us in the seminar this evening. What is social engineering? How do we recognize it, and how do we avoid it?
Well, social engineering has been around since well before computer technology existed, and it's something that Brian's going to be totally familiar with as well. It's those behaviors that people will use to trick you into doing things you wouldn't normally otherwise do. So magicians are absolute masters of social engineering techniques. Sleight of hand, the email that tells you to hurry, the email that tells you, that takes advantage of shame, says, I have a recording of you in a compromising situation. The phone calls that come with emails to make them seem more legitimate. All of those sorts of fraudulent techniques that are used, whether we're talking about email communications or in-person communications or the written communications that come to us through our text messages and whatever else, they take advantage of the fact that we're all in a hurry. So maybe if there's a bright side, COVID-19 has allowed a lot of us to slow down just a little bit and feel less pushed to do things less quickly and sort of assess what's important to us. It gives us that chance to take a break and take a second look at things to decide how legitimate they are, how important they are, what sort of risk they pose to us in order to fight that social engineering technique that might be on the other side of it. I always like to keep social engineering in mind no matter what I'm doing. It doesn't feel cynical to me. It feels to me like a critical thinking skill. To think to myself, you know, not necessarily be suspicious of people, but think to myself, especially in electronic communications, what could be the alternative goal here for somebody? So, for instance, I was invited to sign up for an ideas lab by a forensics company this morning, and I went through their new web interface, filled out the form, which had me create a password and a username. And I sent it off and I got an error back. And I did it a second time, knowing the company, knowing the source of the sender, changed something, sent it off and got back a different error. So I emailed a different person at the company and CC'd the one and said, so far this beta testing program through the Ideas Lab, I'm unable to get into it. And either it's failing already, or you know, it's succeeded in testing me about phishing because I just provided you with a username and a password twice. So they came back and said, oh, we're sorry, we'll flush the cache or whatever they do to make the website work. And she came back and said, try again. But my mind is always thinking that way. It's probably 31 years of law enforcement and growing up with a scientist as a father and educators as parents. We all do things that could be considered social engineering in order to win friends and influence people, right? But bad guys are particularly good at doing this in order to get us to part with our money, particularly, or with information that can help them to make money. So.
Okay, great, Cindy, thank you. We're coming to the closing few minutes, but what I might do is ask the panelists, we're busy working from home, but we're, as we touched on, busy trying to entertain our families at home. So we're on Zoom and they're on Netflix. Are there any simple practical tips that we'd give as takeaways to the audience tonight on how to keep our families safe online and make the experience enjoyable but safe? Brian, I'm going to leave the last word to An Garda Síochána, but Jackie and Marguerite, any final words of wisdom on how to keep ourselves and our families safe online in these times?
I think I probably alluded to it already. I think trying to keep things up to date and maybe keeping some riskier devices kind of away from your kind of core network that you've got you and your family working on, I think are probably the two big things I would say. Unfortunately, some of the finer things or some of the areas that are probably most vulnerable are actually really technical to lock down. Like a lot of, you know, that box that you sometimes have to go and switch the button on and off on because your Wi-Fi is broken, like your router. Some of the vulnerabilities around that are actually really hard to test even for technical people. So there's some things that I would say get a health check on as well if you can set that up given social distancing. But cybersecurity people are actually considered essential workers, so they are actually free to go out and help you do health checks on your home network. So those three things.
Great. Marguerite, any final words of wisdom for us?
Well, I don't know if it's wisdom, but again, I suppose on the human end, I think it's really important, and I think Cindy made the point about the fact that we might have time now, and I think it's about spending time, taking time not just to check your systems, as you're absolutely saying, but also to talk to everybody in the household or everybody that you're communicating with. And I liked your story, Jackie. I think it's very important to consult the 11-year-olds and the 9-year-olds and the 7-year-olds, because you might find that they actually know a lot more about the applications that you're using and they're using than you might do yourself. I know for a fact that I was actually using the House Party application, which is another kind of video sharing with games. And I didn't actually really understand that you can lock the room, so to make sure that uninvited people can't come in, but it was explained to me by a 10-year-old, so that was very useful. But I think it's also to have these conversations in an open and let's all share what we're doing kind of way, rather than, again, the kind of poor design around parental protections, for example, for children. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to set up 2 different age accounts on a PlayStation. It's designed to not allow it to happen, so that you can, funnily enough, the area where you put in your credit card number is very well designed. There are little things like this that just trigger us to think about the social engineering. I think you were talking about, Cindy, for other kinds of purposes as well. I've also had the experience of talking to a much older generation, people in their 80s who do not use computers, do not have no experience before, but they're having an introduction to it now in a kind of wonderful way. But again, safety for them around their uses of YouTube for streaming religious services and things, uses again that we hadn't really thought about before now. But I think having an open kind of warm conversation about it, and my final word would be make complaints, go on social media, send direct messages to the designers of applications and say you can do better, because we're spending money on these, on subscriptions for these applications and devices, and you can really do better in terms of supporting me in my security.
Great, Marguerite, thanks Mel. Cindy, are you asking me to come in there?
Yes, I just have 2 things that would help the vast majority of our clients at this point, and they're very simple. The first one is use multi-factor authentication if it's available, and if it's not available, complain to that app provider and ask for it to be made available. It solves so many problems. and then use complex, unique passwords and a password manager. Those two things would keep the vast majority of clients from having to spend any money with us. And we have enough business that I don't mind pushing some away by keeping people safe.
That's very generous of you, Cindy. Thanks.
I just wanted to add that before you get brought.
Thank you. So Brian, would you concur with the advice given there by Cindy, Jackie and Marguerite, and what else would you add?
Yeah, no, I think it's very well put there from the three speakers. I think when we're talking about internet safety and family internet safety, if we break it down, what are we talking about? We're really talking about two main components. There's technology and there's people. So if we try and secure both, is the best approach. If you look at the technology, and as has been said there about the secure passwords, the two-factor authentications, the parental controls, as difficult as they may be set up, they still are worth setting up, particularly for things like age-appropriate content. Are quite good in that regard. But no matter what amount of technical controls you have in place, unless you have the operator aware of security as well, it's all going to break down. So, and if you're talking about your maybe your young kids or teenage kids, whatever, what I would say is if you think about it, the 3 E's: empower, encourage, engage. And what I go from that is empower. Talk to them, educate them about the dangers online. Let them know what is dangerous, what isn't, what is risky behavior, what isn't risky behavior. So it's about them themselves being aware of where the dangers are and being educated to that effect to steer away from them. Encourage them to be responsible online. So if your young people are not being responsible or putting up inappropriate content themselves, or going into certain websites or engaging in certain type of risky behavior, that's going to bring additional risk onto them as well. So encourage them to be responsible, both from their own perspective of what they're posting themselves, and both from where they're going, and that they're responsibly interacting with people. And that will go a long way to mitigating those risks as well. And then the big one as well, particularly for adults, for parents, is the third E, engage. And that's you yourself, sit down, see what they're doing, what websites are they on, and knowing what you're doing. You're doing it every day of the week in your normal parenting anyway. You know where your kids are at any particular time. So it's the same thinking and the same theory applies online. You should have a good idea where your kids are at any particular time. So I would say do the technology part, and then do the empower, encourage, engage.
Thanks, Brian. So 3 E's, and if you don't expect, suspect. I think they're the two takeaways I'll be taking home myself this evening. So thank you to all the panelists this evening. In wrap up, I might just mention that Consult UCD, I mentioned, had started a campaign around cybersecurity and showcasing UCD's expertise in cyber and security related matters. I'll invite you to visit our website in your own time, www.ucd.ie/campaigns/security research. That one really rolls off the tongue. But there is a place where you'll find profiles of our academics who have a cyber expertise, some articles and content that they may have contributed to, and you'll hear about upcoming cyber related events where again we'll showcase our academic expertise combined with some industry expertise, and we'd love to see you at future events. Orla, many thanks for this evening, and back to you for the closing remarks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And just to say a really big thank you to all of our panelists, to Brian, to Cindy, to Marguerite, and to Jackie. I think that was an amazing discussion, really illuminating, and lots of really practical advice and takeaways. So thank you all so much for participating. Elizabeth, thank you for moderating. I think that was really a really valuable discussion. It doesn't sound like cybercrime is going away anytime soon. So I think this is, having these discussions are really, really important. And just to say to any members of our audience tonight, if you do have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us at UCD Foundation at any point, and we'll certainly put you in touch with the right people. So you're not alone in this. As the slogan goes, we're all in this together. So please do feel free to get in touch with us at UCD at any time. So thank you all once again, and I hope you all have a nice, safe, cyber-free evening, and we'll see you next time.